This is Owen Colfer in Dublin.
This is Andrew Donkin in London.
And welcome to episode 2 of Double Booked.
Double Booked is a podcast for people who like children's books, graphic novels, comics, books, libraries, librarians, bookshops, bookshelves, secondhand bookshops, and secondhand librarians.
That sounds fantastic. Now, Andrew, could you please tell me a little bit about me?
You're the internationally handsome and multi-award-winning Owen Colfer, the author of the Artemis Fowl series of books, the author of the Fowl Twins, the author of Illegal, and the author of all kinds of other marvelous books as well.
I was reading here that in our crib sheet it says a bit shorter than last time, and I realized that's not talking about me. That is actually the introductions. I am not a bit shorter than last time.
I don't think so.
I'll tell you a little bit about you. You are Andrew Donkin, who has written dozens of books and comics and graphic novels, including some highlights, story arcs on Batman for DC and biographies of William Shakespeare. And of course, we have collaborated on over 1,000 pages of graphic novels. Not all have been published, but most have. And so we are uniquely placed and qualified to talk about children's books.
We are. I think they've all been published, unless you can remember any you've got in the bottom drawer, which I don't recall. But yeah, absolutely. And we should start off by saying a big thank you to the lovely readers and voters of the Red Book Award, because just a couple of weeks ago, Illegal, our graphic novel about migration across the Mediterranean, won the 2021 Red Book Award, which is amazing. And thank you very much to the lovely librarians and school teachers who organised that in Scotland.
Absolutely. And what this award itself, the actual practical award, is quite an amazing thing, because it's not a plaque, it's not a medal, it's not a piece of art. Well, it is a piece of art, but it's not a painting. Maybe you could describe to the listener what the award is.
Well, it's a tapestry. And I think we are the first children's authors to actually win a tapestry since William the Conqueror, about 1,000 years ago, got his hands on the famous one. It's a beautiful piece of embroidery, and it's on like a kind of quilted material. And somebody very talented has spent hours and hours hand embroidering all previous 14 winners of the Red Book Award, and then the winner of the 15th year, which is our Illegal, with Giovanni, is over the top, and it's an amazing thing. There's pictures of it on my website, there's pictures of it on your website, so if you want to see it visually, go and have a look at the social media. But it was an amazing thing. We've won medals before, we've won certificates before, we've won a lovely framed copy of our own book, which is great to get a copy of your own book framed back. At least it means they bought a copy to frame, so that's one more. But to actually have a tapestry that's been handmade is amazing. So thank you very much to everybody at the Red Book Awards.
One of your children tells me that you've taken to sleeping underneath the tapestry, using it as a quilt. Is that true?
I'm offering no comment on that publicly.
Well, let's move on rapidly, because that does not sound like a denial to me. What are we going to talk about today?
Okay, so today's running schedule is Me, Myshelf and I is my choice, and it's the Children of Green Knowe by Lucy M. Boston, which is a fantastic series of children's books. So we're going to be talking about those. Then we have got some Mad Science, which is, I know, was your favourite bit of the show last time. And we've got some kids launching an amazing GPS expedition to the South Pole for that. And then we've got something very special. We've got a very special guest. Do you want to talk about him?
Well, I feel this could be my new favorite section, because we are talking to your friend and my friend, Mr. Jonathan Stroud, who is well known to millions of readers all over the world as the author of the Bartimaeus trilogy, among others. But he's here today to talk about the first book of his new series, The Outlaws Scarlett and Brown, which it's kind of it's hard to describe it, but it's a futuristic British Western, I suppose. And Jonathan is a fascinating guy, and he also knows a lot about crafting a really good book for young people. So I think it'll be very interesting to talk to him.
So we're gonna pick his brains, and then we've got in this podcast. It was rubbish, but I loved it. It's your choice, and what have you chosen for us? Going all the way back to the 1980s. What have you picked?
I have chosen one of my favorite films, and there was a time when I would have described it as a guilty pleasure, but I don't believe in those anymore. So this is Highlander, the original Highlander movie with Sean Connery and Christophe Lambert, which was scored by Michael Kamen and Queen. And I love that movie. And I will die on the Highlander hill, and we will talk about that later. And I guarantee you, I will get angry and also possibly cry.
Oh, fantastic! Excellent. All right, there can be only one. So
there can be only, but there were I think 4, but initially there could only be one.
Yeah,
but there were 4, and they're rebooting. There can be only one and 3 more and a reboot. That's the full sentence.
And an animation series. Don't forget the animation
series.
And
an animation series.
So and then we'll round off with some Agony Eoin, because we've had more letters in and communications from Instagram and TikTok and various things that we're on, with people asking for advice from practicing writers, which is indeed what we both are.
I feel that really should be called "Don't Do This at Home," so that anything I say, please don't do it, because it won't work.
Ask a grown-up.
Maybe you could pitch in this time and give me a hand, so I don't feel such immense pressure. But that is a full schedule.
That's a full schedule. We have to bring our engineer Shona said we have to bring the show in less than 4.5 hours. So the pressure is on to fit. He's got to go home for his tea, so we got to fit all that stuff in. So, and Jonathan can talk a bit. So shall we get going?
We could. This is our version of, the Justice League, the new Justice League that has all like 1 million episodes, and everyone has a couple of hours of backstory. This is what I love about Highlander. I won't start that now, but that's one of the things I love. Let's get going, and we go straight to your section with me, Myshelf and I. That sounds like it was written by Sean Connery.
Me, Myshelf and I.
Me, Myshelf and I.
I wonder what they've picked this time. It's me, Myshelf and I.
So you've chosen the book series, the Children of Green Knowe by Lucy M. Boston, or as I thought it was called, the Children of Green Knowe, but it's not Knowe. So I would like you to defend this book, Mr. Donkin, and tell me what's so darn good about it.
I came to this as an adult. This was recommended by a friend of mine, Robin Jarvis, who in himself is a fantastic children's writer. And it wasn't a series that I read as a kid, but it's a series that I've read to my kids, Lexi and Fisher, and they were exactly at the right age to love it. It's a series of 6 books, although each of them stands alone. The first book and the most well-known is The Children of Green Knowe. And all of the books are set in an old manor house, which dates back to the Norman Conquest. So it's a house which is nearly 1,000 years old, has been lived in continuously for nearly 1,000 years. And all of the books involve spirits of its old inhabitants crossing paths. So in the first book, Tolly, a boy, goes there to live with his great-grandmother, and he begins to hear mostly friendly spirits of other kids that have been there, and they eventually materialize and they become friends with him. And in books in the series later on, boys from the past and girls from the past come into the present, and people kind of from the future. And it's a place where, a bit like Nigel Neal's Stone Tape theory, where because of there's so much history and there's so much social interaction in the walls of this very well-loved home, that timescapes kind of meld, and people can step from one time into another, especially children with their imagination. It's very, very atmospherically written, and here's just a little sample of the writing. A little boy was sitting in the corner of a railway carriage, looking out at the rain, which was splashing against the windows and blotching downward in an ugly, dirty way. He was not the only person in the carriage, but the others were strangers to him. He was alone, as usual. There were 2 women opposite him, a fat one and a thin one, and they talked without stopping, smacking their lips in between sentences and seeming to enjoy what they had said as much as if they were something to eat. They were knitting all the time, and whenever the train stopped, the clack-clack of their needles was loud and clear, like 2 clocks. It was a stopping train, more stop than go, and it had been crawling along through flat, flooded country for a long time. Everywhere there was water, not sea or rivers or lakes, just senseless floodwater with rain splashing into it. Sometimes the railway lines were covered by it, and then the train noise was quite different, softer than a boat. And Tolly arrives at the house. He's greeted by his great grandmother, and she doesn't tell him too much about it. And he gradually finds the spirits of the other children. They gradually they gradually solve some of the mysteries in the house. It's a fantastically written book. The series grows and shows you the house in different eras. And what's also amazing about it, and what I really loved, is that it's based on a real book. In 1939, Lucy Boston, who is the author of the series, bought a place called the Manor in Hemmingford Gray, which is in Huntingdonshire, not a million miles away from Cambridge. And that house, the Manor, dates back to the Norman Conquest, and it's only one of two houses in England that have been continually inhabited for nearly 1,000 years. So there's an awful lot of history in there, and you can do tours of it. And Viv and I took the kids to see it last 2 summers ago, obviously in the old world, pre-lockdown, and you can actually tour the house, and it's amazing to sit in a room and look at kind of bricks that had been placed there nearly 1,000 years ago, a couple of years after the Norman Conquest, and know that there had been 1,000 years of human communication and human song and human talk in that very room, that residential domestic room where you were sitting. So the whole place and the whole gardens are absolutely steeped in history, and it's a fantastic series of books, really well written. A little bit less known now, I think, than it should be. One of them won the Carnegie Award. Others got runner-up in the Carnegie Award. And it's the Children of Green Knowe. There was a BBC series about it in the early 90s, late 80s. So that's my pick of Myshelf and I. It's a lovely book.
It would be a wonderful book for schools, because you could read the books and then the teacher could bring you on an expedition to see the house. So that kind of extra element, I think, always makes a book really special. And that couple of paragraphs you read are really well written and really atmospheric. And the way she talks about the water, the flood water, wonderful. I will admit, to my shame, I haven't read that. But because you get very angry if I don't read your recommendations, I'm going to scurry off and buy that immediately. And I love the setup, because that's a classic setup, the child being sent to a strange new house. I mean, so many books have sprung from that setup, but this seems to be particularly successful one of those.
Yeah, it's great. He arrives at the house, which is on the floodplain of a river, and the train comes into a station, and then the car takes him as far as he can with the driver, and then the road is flooded, and then the kind of groundskeeper of the house rows up in a rowboat, and he has to get into the rowboat, and it's pitch black. There's no lighting. It's a countryside, and he's just rowed through the dark towards a house, and then steps off of the boat, and then meets his great grandma for the first time in this kind of like house in a complete lake. And the next morning when he wakes up, the floodwaters are receding, and he's got literally kind of like a new world to go and explore. It's a great opening.
That's very like actually what does happen if you want to meet Derek Landy. You have to go on a boat in the dark. Just kidding. I'm sorry, Derek. Just kidding. Can we move on?
Yes.
To my second favorite part of the show, which is mad science, because I know you like to ferret around on the internet, and you have come up with yet another strange story about two children, enterprising children, who did something pretty amazing.
Hello, you're true to the Weird Science Department. Have you tried turning it on and off again?
This is from The Eye, and it's a piece written by Catherine Lofthouse, credit where credit's due. And I think we should maybe get these guys on the programme, either for a weird science feature, or they could choose their favourite book and talk about it. I will read it to you. Earlier this year, two young Scottish brothers, Ollie and Harry Ferguson, smashed their own world record for most travelled toy ship, sending an adapted Playmobil pirate ship across the world's oceans in an odyssey that began 4 years ago. Now the brothers, aged 11 and 9, so they have the same mental age as us, it's always nice, are planning to beat even this feat by remotely leading a 20,000-kilometre circumpolar Antarctic expedition using the smallest ships to ever sail in the southern seas. The youngsters and their parents, Mac and Vicky from Aberdeenshire, are hoping to launch 1-metre replicas of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror in December for their reimagining of the Ross scientific expedition of 1839 to 43. This time they will be purpose-built wood. The replicas will carry GPS trackers and will allow the family to follow the voyage. The ships are being carved out of elm with help from the local Men's Shed Association. And then someone says, the tree was around 200 years old when it was felled, so it was growing when the original expedition was taking place, and that feels very special and appropriate. Ollie and Harry will help with the sanding and varnishing. We've built a replica out of pine to see how it would sit in the water and how it would work with ice. And then they say, this is all part of the Ferguson's Taste of Adventure. 7 years ago, the family came up with a list of 500 adventures they would embark on together, starting with rock pooling and a visit to a sea sanctuary. By adventure 100, they were launching Lego figures 20 miles above the earth using a large balloon with a camera so they can watch the figures' progress. They document their escapades on their Facebook page. The days are just packed. And they have a book called Ollie and Harry's Marvelous Adventures, which highlights some of their more unusual expeditions. So they have broken the world record twice for most traveled toy ship. Their first one got all the way across to Barbados.
That's amazing. I mean, their combined age is 20, and they're sending ships to Barbados and launching things.
That's a coincidence. That's a real coincidence because our combined IQ is 20. So there's something.
There you go.
There's something magical going on with the numbers there.
I feel in many ways these guys, actually in most ways, these two guys have already surpassed anything we'll ever do.
Science-wise, yeah, I think so. But what we need? I think we need. I'm very into RT expeditions. I think we need to get them on the podcast and get that ship story from them firsthand. Yeah.
I would love to talk to those two guys.
I think they're a future guest, so I think that's what we'll do.
We'll track them down and see what they have to say for themselves. And just because they're children, Andrew, I do not want to be easy on them. I want to give them like a very hard question time type interview and make them answer for their crimes. Experiments.
Okay. Well, there's more than a shade of Artemis about them. They are kind of child prodigies and child geniuses.
Yeah, and there's absolutely they are, but they're the real thing. You see, I had to make up Artemis's genius stroke, so that would take me weeks to think of something that was clever enough for Artemis to have done it. But these guys just seem to be naturals, so I'm a little bit worried that they're just gonna. First of all, if they've read Artemis Fowl, they might say, "Well, actually, that's wrong. This wouldn't happen. Your calculation was wrong." And then they would say something devastatingly, the way children may have devastating insults like, and your head is stupid, that kind of thing. And then I would just go home crying. So maybe you can do a pre-interview and make sure they're nice. I'm sure they're lovely.
Like with big bomb disposal gloves and one of those kind of helmets that bomb disposal people wear just in case. Okay. But I think we need to get them on for a future, not so much weird science, but just amazing science interview. And if you want to read about their adventures in the meantime, then they, as I said, they have a book called Ollie and Harry's Marvelous Adventures, which I had a look at this afternoon, and it's full of color pictures of the mad stuff that their parents are doing to make other parents like me feel enfeebled and embarrassed at what rubbish parenting we're doing.
My parenting style can be summed up in kind of one sentence. It's like, look, here's £10, go away. So that's mine. I don't know how well that's worked because at some point they just don't come back, and that is wrong. So I'm not advocating that at all. Next, we are getting on to one of a mutual friend of ours, Mr. J. Stroud, Jansen Stroud, the wonderful, I suppose, fantasy adventure author, also comedy, who I've had the pleasure of being on tour of the US twice, and I know he's a close friend of yours. So let's maybe listen to a few paragraphs of his latest book, The Outlaws Scarlett and Brown.
Welcome to the part of the show we invite writers to. We really love them and we know you love them too.
That morning, with the dawn hanging wet and pale over the marshes, Scarlett McCain woke up beside 4 dead men. 4! She hadn't realised it had been so many. No wonder she felt stiff. She tipped her prayer mat from its tube and unrolled it on the ground. Sitting cross-legged upon it, she tried to meditate. No luck, not with 4 corpses staring at her and a knife wound throbbing in her arm. A girl couldn't concentrate in those conditions. What she needed was food and coffee. She got to her feet and glared down at the nearest body. It was a portly, black-bearded woldsman in a denim shirt and jeans. He looked old enough to be her father. Perhaps it was her father. His face, half resting on mud and stones, wore an aggrieved expression. "Yeah, we've all got problems," Scarlett said. You try to rob me, that's what you get. She stepped over the man and went down to the lake to inspect the animal snares. Yet again, her luck was poor. The traps were broken, the noose strings bitten through. At the end of a smear of blood, a rabbit's head lay tilted in the bent, wet grass. The long rust-brown ears were cocked upwards, as if giving her a furry two-finger salute. It was like the mud rats had deliberately left it that way. Scarlett McCain swore feelingly in the direction of the forest. Then she took a penny from her pocket and transferred it to the leather cuss box hanging at her neck. Already in the red, and she hadn't even had her breakfast.
Wow, that's fantastic. What I love most about that is it's like you are the master of the setup, and also just the layered exposition that's just layered in there so sweetly. We get so much oblique information there without going really deeply into it. And I know that's all really hard to do, and you've crafted all that. Like, you know, she's an orphan. You know, she doesn't know who her father is. She, you know, she's in a lawless society. You know, she's got some kind of religion because she has a cuss box around her neck. She has a prayer mat, and also that she's a hunter and that she lives in the wild. So it's just amazing. But all that is done in such an entertaining fashion that we don't even realize that we're learning. So kudos to you.
Oh, thank you,
Mr.
Thank
Stroud.
you.
Yes,
well
and
done.
welcome to the program. Welcome to
it's
Double Book.
Pleasure to be
You
here.
are
Double
our
Book.
first ever guest, so that means that you will be the subject in about 5 or 10 years of, you know, pop quiz questions. Who was the first guest on Double Booked?
Who was that?
Wow.
That since forgotten author.
There's no guest in the first episode, and you're the guest on the second one. And you're reading there the fantastic opening to your new book, The Outlaws Scarlett and Brown, being an account of their daring exploits and audacious crimes. What else can you tell us about your fantastic new book series, which is newly out now and has got fantastic reviews?
Well, it stars Scarlett, who you heard in that first little excerpt, and she's a young and formidable bank robber and outlaw in a kind of future. It's a future Britain. It's some unknown time in the future where big things have happened, and the
Post Brexit.
It's very much post Brexit. In fact, it's post Brexit in the sense of being post Brexit. After Brexit, I decided I had to write something that dealt with kind of the fracturing and the breaking up of Britain. So this is it. Being a fantasy writer, I got rid of all the kind of parties and boring political stuff, and just had a world of cannibals and monsters and various kingdoms. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with that.
What is the hero's journey, Jonathan, in this? What do Scarlett and Brown have to do?
Well, so Scarlett starts off, and she's, as you heard from the beginning, she's deeply, formidable and can kill 4 men without really breaking sweat. And she thinks that she's got it all sorted, but actually she's very lonely and has all kinds of problems. And she doesn't realize this until she meets this boy called Albert Brown, who she rescues from a wrecked bus in the middle of nowhere. And she takes him rather against her will. She takes him towards safety, but bad things happen to them, and she begins to realize that there's more to him than meets the eye. And her the journey really is about characters, because I don't know about you guys, but I think that a book that's worth reading, usually you've got a couple of characters in the middle who bounce off each other, and if they're opposites, so much the better. And if they've got a bit of sarcasm and they're good at taking the mickey out of each other, then that's pretty perfect. So
he's just describing us, Owen. He's just describing us.
Apart from them being different, I think we're even starting to look like.
Well, do you remember
that?
Do you remember that reference in the first bit to a bearded, portly Woldsman that she's just killed? Yeah, there you go, guys.
Hey.
Page 1.
We can cut this interview to be as short as we want it to be. It could end up just you reading the opening paragraph or the opening word. Here's Jonathan in his new book. Yeah,
Scarlett.
So just say that morning. That's it. And join us next time on Double Book. So, can you tell us about the writing process for you when you're approaching a new series? Because you're well known for your series. You had the fantastic Bartimaeus trilogy, and then a cheeky 4th book, and you've had Lockwood and Co. So, what's the writing process? Not just for the first book, but when you're approaching a whole new world and a whole new trilogy.
So for me, always it starts with a single image or a single scene, and in this case that usually ends up being the first seen in the book. And in this case, it was the idea of this character sort of waking up next to some dead men. You don't know who the heck they are, and a bit like Owen just said, in that opening bit, you seed in all kinds of little teasers and clues which make you kind of interested in what the story might be. And as a writer, when I wrote it, I didn't have a clue, really. I didn't know who she was or why she was on her own, or where she was going to go. But I was excited by that image. And then as a writer, you basically go on the journey with your characters. You slowly explore outwards with them, and you investigate the world, and you investigate who they are and what's their past, and you gradually build it outwards until eventually, theoretically, down the line, you might have a series of books and you've got the whole world explained and everything. At the moment, I'm working on book 2, and I'm still there, kind of feverishly trying to build outwards. It's like in the cartoon where you've got some cartoon character getting chased, and they're having to sort of they have to build the bridge as they go. They sort of putting it down frantically so they don't actually fall over the edge. And it's a bit like that, really.
I think that's very useful. We do a question section later, and I think one of the questions is about world building. So I think if hopefully the person is listening from the beginning, and they'll be able to appreciate your answer. I remember one of the things I admired about you, Jonathan, when we were on tour with Lockwood, was your preparation, and you had your magic bag, and maybe you could describe to anyone who hasn't seen your brilliant show, what is it that comes out of that bag, and what are the relevance of those objects?
Well, I always carry this around. I was very envious of Owen, because you were always you sort of strolled into whichever sort of remote portion of America it was, and you'd roll up there with possibly a copy of your book in your pocket, but sometimes not even that, because sometimes you turn up with just like a piece of A4 which had the precise quote that you were going to be reading out during the show, and you were just a man who travelled light. And I was there with this massive bag in which I had. When I was doing Lockwood, I had all kinds of exciting ghost hunting kit and iron chains and salt bombs and stuff. But I also had lots of sort of early books that I'd written when I was a kid. Because one of the things that really interests me is how my own sort of creative journey started when I was really quite little. And I've got these ridiculous little books that I did when I was about 5 or 6, and I was just feverishly writing Robin Hood stories because I'd read Robin Hood in Ladybird edition and I absolutely loved it, and I wanted to do my own version. And really, sitting here as a sort of jaded, slightly sort of hairier kind of guy, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm getting excited about some genre or some kind of world, and I'm trying to make my own version. But yeah, I always carry around too much kit.
But it was I remember you always took up a volunteer from the audience, and that was the highlight of the show, when this kid would come up and then you would dress him up as a ghost.
It's always good. Yeah, that's right. I would dress him up in. We always had a sword, which is good. Sword, a ghost hunter's belt with infinite pockets. With magnesium flares and salt bombs and thermometers and all kinds of other key bits of equipment that you need to fight the supernatural. And the iron chains were always a winner.
And were you ever stopped at an American customs and excuse me, sir, you seem to have a sword and magnesium flares?
Surprisingly, I never was, which always kind of disappointed me. But it did beg a belief that I was allowed in the country, because I had all these little vials of white powder, some mysterious substances, and I had a sword and some chains. It's like, how illegal can you get? But no, they welcome me with open arms. Welcome to America. Come on.
Did you ever get asked to do ghost exorcisms or anything, carrying all of that paraphernalia around?
I never did. No, I went.
Did you wish you had? Would you be up for it? Would you do it?
I would be, but only if you guys were with me. Because to be honest, I'd be a bit scared.
We'd do that. I'd do that. We'd be up.
Would
for
you
that.
be up for it?
Absolutely.
I'd totally be up for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
we should set up a future episode of the podcast.
Have a special edition.
Halloween special.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be
live
great.
exorcism.
Now, speaking of Lockwood a little bit, I read on the worldwide global interweb that Lockwood is becoming a Netflix television series. Is that correct? What can you tell us about that?
It is indeed. I'm extremely excited, and I'm sort of hopping around the room with delight. Yeah. So Complete Fiction production company and Netflix are teaming up to make a the first series of Lockwood and Co. Joe Cornish is the showrunner.
Wow.
And the director and writer, and I've seen a lot of the scripts, and they're fantastic. I'm very excited about the casting, and I can't talk about that yet. The annoying thing is I can't talk about it very much at all, except that it's all very imminent. Theoretically, I think they're starting to film in July. And
are they doing the first book or all three, or what are they doing?
Again, I'm not. I think I'm officially not allowed to quite say, but yeah, certainly the first book is going to be involved. They're not doing the full 5-book series in one. Go.
But they're doing maybe something in the middle.
But they're going to play around a little bit. But it's exciting, and they're being very true to the spirit of the books, which is obviously lovely for me.
I went back when you put up something about Joe Cornish. I went back and watched Attack the Block again, and I think his humor and your humor will really gel really well. I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So congratulations!
I'm really chuffed. Yeah, Joe's script for the first one is lovely because there's obviously a lot of stuff in there that I'm familiar with because I wrote the original thing, but then he's put in all kinds of new little nuances and his own humor. So you've got this fusion, and it's deeply, well, potentially I think deeply kind of cinematic and very funny. So yeah, I'm fingers crossed. I'm very excited.
Well, fantastic. And what's next for Mr. Jonathan Stroud when you pack away Scarlett and Brown?
Well, so Scarlett and Brown will be with me for the next year or so at least. I'm working on book 2, possibly a book 3 to come. We'll have to see. This is where the world building comes in because potentially you could go on forever, but I'm assuming that 3 books might be about the limit. After that, I do have this desire to return to my first love, Bartimaeus, who's
Oh wow!
Bartimaeus the genie, and I wrote a little bit of a fragment of a book a few years ago, and I really would love to do that. So
that's a very rich world, as I know to my cost from having done and enjoyed having grappled with doing a graphic novel adaptation of the first Bartimaeus book, which is fantastic, but it's an extraordinary rich world that you conjured there in a kind of world of Victorian magicians and their apprentices and so on. So, which was an absolute prime example of world building, both very convincing and also particularly expands through the whole trilogy.
One of the
as I struggled to fit it in, he said bitterly.
Yes, you still have this sort of slight twitch I can see in your eye, but it's one of the pleasures of doing that. If you do create, as you guys know, if you create something that feels quite robust and 3-dimensional, then there's always this sort of slight urge to go back and explore it further. So yeah, before I drop dead, I wouldn't mind doing that.
Brilliant. Jonathan, thank you so much for being our first ever guest on Double Booked. We will get you back to do some real life ghost hunting, which I think is an absolute must.
No, the exorcism,
real exorcism. And Jonathan's fantastic new book, The Outlaws Scarlett and Brown, is out now from all good bookshops at $7.99 or less. Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you soon. Take care.
So that was fantastic to hear from Mr. Stroud. And we're going to go now from what I would regard as high culture, which is a new book by Mr. Stroud, full of creativity and genius and well-crafted writing, to, let's just say something else.
It was rubbish, but I loved it.
Tell me, how did it happen, for God's sake?
Why does the sun come up? Or are the stars just pinholes in the curtain of night? Who knows? What I do know is that because you were born different, men will fear you, try to drive you away, like the people of your village.
So what is the subject of your It Was Rubbish, but I Loved It?
This week's It Was Rubbish, but I Loved It is the original Highlander movie, which I remember from the 80s very, very fondly indeed. I was first attracted to this fantasy epic by the soundtrack, which was recorded by my favorite band at the time, Queen, who did a lot of the music, including the single. Very often in those days, it was a single that went along with the movie, and it was called "It's Kind of Magic." I don't know if you remember.
Of course.
That. So when I saw the video for the single, I immediately sought out the movie. And I think I approached it in the right way. I was prepared to give it a lot of leeway because I really loved the band. And in certain ways, you really have to give this a lot of leeway. For example, Sean Connery is cast as an Egyptian who makes like zero attempt to adopt any Egyptian affectations whatsoever, including accent, skin tone, or clothes.
Is he still very Sean Connery?
Yes, he's totally Sean Connery. I'm Sean Connery, the Egyptian. It's like amazing. And then the Scott.
Let me ask you a question. Does Sean Connery like herbs? Partially. I know you'd love it. So to paint me and our listeners, both of them, because there's three people here, paint me and both our listeners a picture of when you first saw the film and how old you were. Was it in a cinema? Were you on a date? Were you with mates? And what cinema did you see it in? Paint us a picture for you going in with your expectations of seeing a little bit of Freddie and Queen.
No, I did not see it in the cinema. We lived in a rural town called Wexford, and there wasn't really. There were two cinemas. I believe one was closed at the time, but actually, you would get one movie a week, and it would be the biggest movie on release at that time. So Highlander would never have been that big a movie, although over the decades it has become a cult classic. So I would have seen it on a very strange device that our listeners will not probably remember, which is a VHS tape. So a videotape. And we had one of those VHS machines that possibly could play the tape or alternately could eat the tape. And on this occasion, luckily, it would play the tape. So the setup of the movie is, and you don't know going in because now you know everything about a movie before you ever see it, but in those days you didn't. The setup of the movie is that there's this guy, Connor McLeod, who's living in modern day New York, and he has an antique store in modern day New York. But you found out that he is actually 500 years old. And he is one of a strange race who, for some reason, all have to cut each other's heads off until the last one standing, and he wins the prize. And there's no, like, now everything is explained to within an inch of its life, how this happened, what's everyone's motivations, their backstory. But the whole backstory is there's a couple of voiceovers, and one of them is like, from the dawn of time we came. We don't know why. We have no idea what we're doing. We just have to cut each other's heads off. And that was it. And we were like, okay, I'm in. Sounds good. So you get all these.
There's actually a scene, isn't there, where the lead guy says, "What? Why? Why can there only be one? Why do we have to do this?" And Sean Connery just says, "Why are there stars? Why is there a sun?" No, he does, and that's it. He's just saying, "Well, look, there's stars in the sun. You don't know how they work either," and that's it. That's the whole
and it's
thing.
kind of it's not really Pixar quality backstory, if you know what I mean. And then the lead guy, Christophe Lambert, obviously a Frenchman, he's cast as the Highlander, a Scottish man, and he does make an attempt at a Scottish accent. And the less said about that, the better. But in spite of, and the special effects are not great. At one point, Christophe Lambert levitates, and you can see the wires lifting him up. And in order to disguise that, they kind of put these lightning bolts that they must have drawn in with pencils. So it's all pretty bad. But it has a lot of things going for it. And I think the best thing it has is the villain, who was played by Clancy Brown, and he's the Kurgan. And if anybody can find a better villain in an action movie, I mean, he's right up there with the Die Hard villain. That's how good he is. And I think, so basically it's a movie about all these guys can only die if you cut their head off. And who's going to be the guy with his head? Who's going to keep his head in the end? And it happens. I mean, I don't think I don't want to ruin the ending, so I won't tell you who it is, but it's not the Kurgan. That's all I can say. Who came from the steppes of Russia and I think used to eat babies. I think that was one of the bad things they did. So it's a ridiculous good time, but it manages to make sense inside its own world. in ways that I think a lot of modern movies don't make sense. And it's been imitated a million times. There's a new imitation out now, I think, called Infinite, about a race of people called the Infinites who live forever. And they try to explain the whole why they all try to kill each other thing, and it doesn't really work. So if you want the original, go back to the Highlander. And they made a sequel where they tried to give the backstory. And the backstory they gave was that they were all from another planet, and then they came down in some kind of mad spaceship. I don't even understand it. I've seen the movie about 3 times. It's an awful movie. But the guy who directed it, I think was Russell Mulcahy, an Australian, what he did brilliantly was the transitions from one shot on one world to another world.
He was a very famous 80s video director, and you can recognize his directing style because nearly every single scene, there are about 25 massive Hollywood fans off stage blowing air so that everybody's hair is on the side of their heads and permanently being blown back like they're in a music video. There's neon lights everywhere, and there's lots of very quick cutting between close-ups of people, which happens just to be a technique that saves lots of budget when you don't need to show anything behind them.
Yeah, absolutely.
His style like that is all over it.
The most memorable transition he did was Conor McLeod is in his antique shop thinking about the past, and as he thinks, he stares deep into his aquarium. The camera goes into the aquarium and then rises up to the top, and actually you're now in a Scottish loch, and you have transitioned into the past. And it sounds very melodramatic, and it is melodramatic, but it's also quite masterful. I think when it came out, it didn't do very well.
Well, I've got two trivia questions for you now. So one of them is about the budget. So the Highlander, the movie cost 19 million to make. Okay, I guess at least 1 million of that was Sean's Egyptian dialogue coach. How much do you think it took worldwide? How much do you think it took? So it cost 19 million. How much did it take that year? Have a stab.
35 million.
It took 12 million.
12 million.
12 million. So it was actually a flop. It didn't even that. It has since. You're absolutely right. It's bizarrely become a cult, and it's had two or three movie spin-offs, and there was a whole animated series. But at the time, it took 12 million worldwide, which was terrible figures for a film that cost 19.
And 19, even then, 19 probably wasn't a huge.
No,
budget.
it wasn't a massive amount, but it was a decent night out in a curry house. To be honest.
And whenever I go into New York, we go a bit, but maybe twice a year, and you're driving in from the airport, you drive past the famous Silver Cup sign, and I always flash back to the final fight scene between Conor McLeod and the Kurgan, which takes place on that rooftop. So I really would recommend, if you're a fantasy action fan, looking that up. And it's just come on to Netflix now. So I did watch it again on Netflix, and it's been remastered. It looks pretty great. But
have they remastered the script? Have they remastered that too?
They have not remastered the script or the special effects.
Okay, all right.
It's just like you can see the wires now more clearly.
More clearly. And I have my second trivia question to you is: do you know the circumstances under which the script was written? Do you know the story of the script, which was written by Gregory Wyden? Do you know the story of the script?
I don't. I feel like I'm not a real fan.
Well, no. But you'll like this, and I think listeners to our podcast will like this. Gregory wrote the script as a final year project in his writing degree at the University of California. So he wrote the screenplay as a project, not intending necessarily to sell it. It was an idea that came to him when he was walking around the Tower of London looking at old historic stuff. And his tutor thought it was so good that he gave it to an agent who thought it was so good that he sold it, and it became a movie.
That's like a real Hollywood rags to riches story. We should pretend we're film students and.
Well, in the case of Highlander and the scenes in medieval times, it's a rags to rags story. Surely, be honest.
I know my laugh sounds very high pitched, but in real life, that's just a microphone. In real life, it's a very deep Sean Connery type chuckle. But
Sean is very good in it. He's very flamboyant, and he's clearly enjoying himself.
Yeah.
He did all of his scenes in 7 days, and then just took his money and went home. 7 days.
Yeah, and I think he went into the sequel on the condition that they killed him within 5 minutes or something. So
Yes.
he didn't survive very long. But yeah, you can. But he is brilliant, even though he's playing an Egyptian. I think he's described as an Egyptian peacock at one point.
Yes.
He is fantastic. He's Sean Connery, and he just has that magic. So,
and when he does the
worth
voiceover, there's a very strange echoey effect, isn't there? There's a kind of like strange echoey effect to it that makes it sound like he's speaking to you from the past or speaking to you, in your head from a memory. And apparently, I was reading today that echo effect was caused because the voiceover was a later edition, and Sean Connery recorded it in the bathroom of his Spanish villa, and that's why it's echoey. and they liked the effect and just left it.
Oh yeah, I'd say I think Sean Connery probably told them they liked the effect
and left
and
it.
They kept it in. So that's fantastic. But now it's time for something sensible, because I believe the internet has been on fire with people looking for more advice from me. Believe it or not, in the section we like to call Agony Eoin, for two reasons. First of all, because it is a play on the old agony aunt, but also because I experienced quite a lot of agony trying to give sensible advice to sensible questions. So maybe you could give me a hand out this time, Andrew, because I think you're the more sensible one of the two. But Agony Andrew, that sounds really good too.
Thank you for your question. Agony Eoin will be with you shortly.
If you're calling me the more sensible one of the two of us, then you're in quite considerable deep trouble at that point. But here's our first question. So we were talking with Jonathan about world building, which his book, as I said in the interview, got particularly praised for. And here's a question from Vinny Egg. I've thought about writing fiction and non-fiction. The problem with fiction is, how do I ever design a new world from scratch? Other times I feel like writing about my life, and then I run into the thought, who wants to read that? So how do you design a world for writing?
I think to approach it like that, it's very overwhelming. If you're approaching it in such a way that, I have to build a world today, it's as overwhelming as the idea, I have to write a book, I have to write 100,000 words. You need to approach it, I think, in a piecemeal way, which I suppose is not a great phrase, but little by little. So if you have your chapters broken down, you think, well, today I have to talk about, for example, the port where these sailors are going to meet and the boat that they're going to steal, or whatever it is. And so that is what you have to describe. And the world then will build itself as you progress. So don't think about having to write 100,000 words about this strange parallel universe. Just think about, well, today I have to write this piece. And before you know it, your building blocks will start to stack up. And in maybe 6 months' time, you will have your world. And of course, keep copious notes. And I think you'd agree with me there, Andrew, as we both do that. And because if you're building your world, you have to remember what it is you already built, so that you don't contradict yourself going forward. But in brief, I would say, little by little, one part of your world at a time. And would you have anything to supplement there, Andrew?
Well, only just that when this is new world from scratch, most world building, and even in the Outlaws book we were talking about, it's not, you're never starting from scratch. It's usually a variation of a world, isn't it? It might be a world where Hitler won World War II, or where the Roman Empire didn't fall, but it's usually a world, you're not starting on a blank planet where it's a completely alien culture and nothing is the same. So it's usually you've got a lot to build with, but you need to think, what are the changes? What's different about a world where there is a fairy civilization under the ground, as opposed to our world where we don't know that exists? What's the actual difference? And then hone in on that a bit.
Absolutely, because there will be touchstones. You're going to be able to breathe air. There will be water. There will be ships. There will be bipeds, probably. There will be language. So 90% of the stuff is going to be familiar to the people reading it. So you just have to worry about that extra 10%. And you can do that one step at a time.
Brilliant. Okay, Rachel from America says, when you have multiple ideas, how do you choose the right one? I have trouble focusing on one story or one idea. and also adds, I think, in a quite undermining way to both of us, also, what gives you the courage to share your writing with others in public? Which I like. You fool! You're both full. How dare you? How can you?
Yeah. So, how did you ever think?
Yeah, for a second. So let's deal with the first one. How do you know when you have multiple ideas? How do you choose the right one?
Well, firstly, I would say you're lucky to have multiple ideas. A lot of people don't have. But I've found myself in that situation with almost every book where I have a few contenders and I don't know which one is going to work. And so what I do is I work up each one a little bit, and my subconscious is running this like a horse race, and eventually one will pull ahead, or maybe two. So I'll do a little bit more work on those. And my rule is, if I get past 10,000 words, I'm finishing that book. And that's my rule. And I don't break that rule. So if I get to 10,000, then that book is getting finished, and I will plan it out and I will get it finished, because psychologically it is very, very positive just to finish the book. There will always be time, and you will try to undermine yourself by saying, oh, but this idea B is much better, let's do this other idea, but you got to stick to your guns. And once you get to that, whatever that point is, that no turning back point is for you, and as I said, for me it's 10,000, you got to stick with that idea until the end. Now, I'm not saying you've got to abandon the other ideas. You can, of course, keep those in your notes, make a little folder about good ideas, and you keep it in there, and maybe that's one that you'll get back to. And you will be surprised that your sneaky little unconscious is going to be working away on that idea while you are finishing your initial book. So in brief, as usual, have 3 or 4 things on the go, but once you get to a specific point, then that is the book you commit to. And as for question B, Rachel, it might have been meant as a little bit of a joke there, but I do worry, and I think we all, Andrew too, we all worry about, will anyone want to read this? Is anyone ever going to be interested? And funnily, the only time I don't think like that is when Andrew and I are collaborating, because then I trust him enough to know that he would tell me, and he does tell me, and I will tell him if we don't like the idea. So when we're working together, I relax, because I know that if both of us like it, then it's probably a pretty good idea.
And a worst case scenario, because I love collaborating. I love collaborating with you. A worst case scenario, thinking if this book goes really, really badly wrong and we're pursued by a lynched mob with flaming torches and end up on the gallows, at least you will be there too, and we'll have some like kind of gallows banter, in the seconds before they pulled the trapdoor. And that for me is, what it's all about. That makes that scenario
that makes
just
it all
that less bad.
That's why. Just we'll have that 2 seconds, but I do imagine that they'd be very, these gallows people, you'd be halfway through your amazing final quip and they just pull that lever.
Some people have no respect for gallows humor.
That you just say, but I'll tell you one thing,
and
then the thing you would tell them would be.
That would be very Arabian Nights, wouldn't it? We would have to keep the crowd entertained on the gallows, or they pull the switch. That would be it. We would have to outlast the whole crowd, and eventually, maybe if they drift off, and the guy pulling the lever finally drops to sleep, and we can escape. That would be how it happens. Yeah.
I feel we could do that, though. I think that's actually one thing we could do. Anyway, that's not. I don't think that's helped Rachel at all, but we did our best.
Well, I think on that image of us on a gallows with a man about to pull the lever if he's not permanently entertained, I think that we will leave Agony Eoin for this week and say thank you very much to everybody. Thank you very much to Jonathan for being our first ever guest on Double Booked.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And please spread the word that we're not as nasty as people think we are.
And next week's, next podcast guest is the very, very talented and multi-award winning Jenny Valentine, who is going to come and talk to us about her new series of books and writing in general, which will be great.
That's great. And if you have any questions for Jenny, and indeed any questions for Agony Eoin or Agony Andrew, you can contact us through the usual social medias, or you could send us to our podcast email, which is doublebookedpodcast@aol.com, and we will get to as many as we can.
After we had recorded the very first podcast, I waited about 3 days after Seamus, our brilliant producer and sound engineer, sent us the final cut, and I played it, and I said, great. And about 4 days later, I went to the email address, and I was really disappointed that there were no emails in. And after about an hour, I remembered that it hadn't been posted publicly anywhere, and then no one had heard it whatsoever. But I spent like 4 hours going, not one email. And then I went, oh yeah. Okay, absolutely nobody's heard the email address. And I was able. But by the time, just saying, listeners, don't make me go through that again. That's all.
No, poor Andy. He was very upset.
So, all right, regular double bookers, we will see you next time. This is Andrew Donkin in London saying, thank you for joining us.
And this is Owen Colfer in Dublin saying Slán live, which is goodbye to you all in Irish.
Double Book was produced by Owen Colfer and Andrew Donkin and Seamus Redmond. Sound editing by Seamus Redmond. Theme music by Liam Bates. This has been a Silver Foxes production. Remember, the value of Silver Foxes can go down as well as up.